Okay, and this is a pretty short lesson. An important skill in grade 10 and 11 is you have to be able to convert from standard form to vertex form. So I'm going to walk you through one of these and show you two different methods. And I have a feeling most of you are going to like method 2 better, and that's totally fine with me. But I want to review completing the square from grade 10, which, if you know completing the square really well, is a super fast method of doing this. But you have to know it pretty well to make it fast. Otherwise, when I explain it here, it seems like it's a really long method. All right, so let's convert this parabola here, y equals 1/2 x squared minus 6x plus 7 to vertex form. Now remember, no matter what form it's in, a is always the same. So in this case, a is positive 1/2, right? B is negative 6, c is 7. All right, so I'm just going to move this out of the way a bit here so I have a little more room. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so like I said, a is 1/2, b is negative 6, and c is positive 7. Now I like this method the most because I can do it really quickly, and the idea is that you can do a lot of the math in your head. When I'm writing it out here, I'm going to make it seem way more convoluted and longer than it is, but it's just because I'm trying to explain it really clearly. If you know this method, it's really quick. All right, so let me write out the steps here, and you can write them down in your note. Step 1 is to factor a from the first two terms. So factor a from the first two terms. Okay, so what are the first two terms? Well, that would be these two. So we're going to ignore that positive 7. He basically gets ignored to the very end. He's just going to hang it out the back. Okay, now they call this completing the square because what you're trying to do is you're trying to make a trinomial square. So a trinomial square is one, I'm just going to make up one that isn't the same as ours, but when you have something like this, like x minus 3 times x minus 3, that's what we're basically trying to make. We're trying to take this here and make it into a trinomial square, the first two terms. And that's the secret, the whole secret to completing the square, because you're completing a trinomial square. All right, so anyways, here we go. So y equals, we're going to factor out the 1/2 from the first term, it's x squared, and when you factor out negative 1/2, or sorry, positive 1/2 from negative 6, you're going to get negative 12x, right? And if you're unsure, just reverse it. What's 1/2 times x squared? It's 1/2 x squared. What's 1/2 times negative 12? It's negative 6. Okay, so we factored it properly. Always double check that before we move on to the next step. Okay, step 2. All right, so what we want to do here is we want to divide the coefficient of the x term by, hang on, divide, I want to get the whole note here for you, the coefficient, okay, of x by 2 and square it. Now what we're doing here is this is where we're trying to figure out the numbers we need to make a trinomial square. So this is generally something I might do in my head, and maybe you would too if you know this method really well. So the term we're talking about here is this, the negative 12. That's the coefficient of x. So we're going to take that number there. Let's divide it by 2 and square it. So what's negative 12 divided by 2 squared, right? So negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Right? Negative 6 squared is 36. That's the magic number we're looking for, okay? So this is the magic number we need to complete our square. All right, so let's move up here and do step 3. Step 3, we want to add and subtract. Okay, sorry, I had to pause there, so I don't know where I was at. Add and subtract this number inside the brackets, okay? So essentially what we're doing in here is we're adding 0, because if you add and subtract a number, you're just adding 0. So what does this look like? All right, so y equals, we have the 1/2 factored out, we have x squared minus 12x. Okay, so that number we just talked about, we're going to add 36, but we're also going to subtract 36 in the bracket, which is all you've done there is you've added 0, right? Because plus minus 36 is 0. Okay, now what we're going to do next, what we have to do next is remove the negative 1 from the brackets. So the negative 36, we take that out. So let me just write this here. This is where we got to be careful. So remove the negative, right? The negative 1 that we just added from the brackets and multiply it by a out front, right? Because it's inside the brackets we're taking out. So multiply multiply by a, because a is out front of the bracket. So we're going to take this negative 36 out here, and we have to multiply it by the 1/2, and then we're just going to put it behind. All right, so what does that look like? It looks like this. Y equals 1/2. We're going to leave the x squared in there. We're going to leave the negative 12x. We're going to leave the positive 36. All right, so we're going to take out negative 36, times it by 1/2, so that's negative 18. And let's just add that to the back now. So now we're going to have negative 18, right? Okay, and finish it up. The final step is factor the trinomial square. So that trinomial that you see there in the middle, that is a trinomial square. And just simplify the numbers at the back also. So let me show you what I mean. Factor the trinomial square. Okay, so the reason why we put that positive 36 in there, because that's the magic number to make this a trinomial square. So in other words, what number times itself multiplies to make positive 36 but adds to make negative 12? The answer is negative 6. So in other words, this can be factored like this. Y equals 1/2 x minus 6, x minus 6. And then at the back, we can add and subtract the 7 minus 18. So 7 minus 18 gives us negative 11. And that x minus 6, it's always going to make a trinomial square. So we just write it like this, x minus 6 squared minus 11. And there you go. It is now in vertex form, where our vertex here would be 6, negative 11. Okay, so that does seem like a really complex method, but it's just due to all the explaining and trying to break it down. It's actually really quick. Practice this on some of these if you like this method, and if you've used it before. It's the fastest method of doing it, but you got to know it pretty well to do it quick. And when I do it, I don't usually even show this many steps, because a lot of it I'm doing in my head, such as, you know, taking this negative 12 here and dividing by 2 and squaring, getting 36. And then when I get to this place where I'm adding and subtracting it, all I end up doing is I just take the negative 36, the negative value out immediately out of the bracket. I don't even show this step. I multiply it by the 1/2 out front or whatever the number is, and I add it to the back right away. So you could cut this down into a lot fewer steps if you know this method well. All right, if you don't like this method, let's look at the other method, which for a lot of you I think is going to be probably quicker, and you'll probably like it more because it's just using skills that we've already talked about. So technically you already are going to know a method 2. When I do it, it should look very familiar. Okay, so here's method 2. This is the version that a lot of you will like better, unless you're already pretty comfortable with converting to vertex form using completing a square. And again, anything I do, if you want some more advice, I can obviously give you advice on Edsby. I can drop some more examples, but do a search on YouTube. Like, let's say you want more examples of completing the square. Look up completing the square method or completing the square quadratics, and you will find so many teachers who've made so many videos. You know what I mean? That's the thing. You can find all kinds of stuff. But let's do method 2 here. All right, so method 2, it's in standard form. Let's identify A is 1/2, B is negative 6, C is 7. So this is just using what we already know, which is to find the axis symmetry using that formula we've already done in the last 2 lessons, right? So here we go. X equals negative B divided by 2A. This is a quick method also, right? All right, so negative B, negative 6 divided by 2 times A, 2 times 1/2. All right, well, negative 6 is 6, 2 times 1/2 is 1, 6 divided by 1 is 6. So there's the X value of my vertex. Got it, right? Now, that's the first step. Step 2, substitute that in like we did in the last 2 lessons to find the Y value. So let's just sub that in. 1/2 times 6 squared minus 6 times 6 plus 7. All right, so I've got 6 squared is 36, 1/2 of 36 is 18, minus 36 plus 7, add it all up, you get Y equals negative 11. So the thing is, if you do it this way, ta-da, there's your vertex, right? Your vertex is 6, negative 11. That's H and K in vertex form. And you already know A, which was given to us in the original one. Because remember, A is the same in all 3 versions of a quadratic equation. So here is vertex form, A times X minus H squared plus K. Let's just sub in what we know. We know A, we know H, we know K. So just put them all in there and you're good. Y equals 1/2 is A, X minus H, so H is positive 6, so it's going to be X minus 6 squared plus K, so plus negative 11 minus 11. So I have a feeling a lot of you are looking at this method going, okay, that's way easier than the first method. I'm just going to stick with this. And that's totally fine by me. But remember, you have to know how to convert a quadratic equation to vertex form. That is a definite must. So if you like this method better because it's pretty familiar to what we've already done, stick with it, okay? You do not need to know both. So don't flood my email box saying, do I have to know both methods? No, pick one, stick with it, whatever you like. All right, so that's the end of this lesson. Move on to the next one when you're ready.